Thank you. So I thank also for the organizers to have invited me. So they had the opportunity to come back to Bure-sur-Yvette, l'IHES, where I have been during my sabbatical in 87, 88 for 2 months. So it's a pleasure to be here again. So I can perhaps start with remembering how I met Thom, how I came to Thom. I met him the first time in 78 in Vienna at a conference on semiotics, where he gave a plenary lecture, and with many people there. And after the lecture, I went to him to speak with him, and he came then to my small conference on verbal semantics and catastrophe theory. And so we had the opportunity the next days speaking. I had just finished my Habilitationsthesis on Verständigungsdynamik, dynamics of understanding or of communication, where I applied catastrophe theory. I came to it in the 77 to Thom's book Stabilité Structurelle et Morphogenèse, more or less by a kind of negative reaction to further earlier work in linguistics, where I had applied logics and algebra to different problems, and I was seeking for something different. Sometimes one is trying to change things. Okay, this was a good opportunity. So I will summarize what I have done in linguistics in relation to catastrophe theory, mainly based on 2 of his books, his major books. In 72, Stabilité Structurelle et Morphogenèse. I used the 2nd volume in 77 as a completed and corrected version. This was important for my special topic. And then Esquisse in semiophysik in 88. So this is the 2 main topics of my talk today. So in his book on 72 that brought René Thom admiration and international fame, only subchapter 13.4, page 309 to 315, just 6 pages, it treats with language under the title Homo loquens. The list of the 16 archetypes discussed in this section stands on page 312. I will show it immediately. In a paper, Topologie et linguistic, published in Essays on Topology and Related Topics, it is not in semiotics but in a mathematics paper, he gave a complete description of the underlying conjecture, which goes beyond the 6 pages in his book. On his conjecture on basic schemata of sentences, a topic classically treated regarding logics and notions of subject and predicate. His conjecture was a provocation for linguists standing in the tradition of structuralism and those believing that logic, either traditional or modern logic, is a proper frame for questions in semantics and ontology. Thom's innovative and radical thoughts had 2 main sources. On the one hand, his training and research in mathematics, especially in differential topology, and on the other hand, his philosophical reflections, which motivated him to consider the natural sciences, for example, experimental physics, the ideal of modern science, and human sciences from a new perspective. His concepts for linguistics are only a tiny part of this new conception of scientific work. For Thom, mathematics, and more particularly the tradition stemming from Poincaré, having given significant results in the theory of singularities and structural stability, provides as Kant already understood concerning Euclid's geometry, the proper conceptual frame that can make the mass of empirical observations or experiments understandable. His attitude may be compared to Plato's reconstruction of the universe and the Human Mind in his dialogue Timaeus. And I will change this. Yeah. Okay, there was two. Okay. In his, I will come back to Plato and this Platonic solids later in my talk. In his book Structural Stability and Morphogenesis, Thom does not refer to any of his time's expert semioticians or linguists in the late 60s. He refers only to Lucien Tenière, whose main posthumous work was published in 1959. He was a linguist and also applied linguist in didactics. But he had already developed his innovative ideas in the 1930s. It is at a time when structuralism only started really in the Prague school and the Copenhagen school. So here's the list of, I'm too quick. Okay, this is a list of 16 archetypes which will be the topic of my discussion immediately. Just give some ideas about linguistics and semiotics. And Ferdinand de Saussure, who 1857 to 1913 was a professor of comparative linguistics, mainly in European languages. And he had initiated the modern structural linguistics. He didn't use structure, and it's only in the 30s that these schools in Czechia and in Copenhagen took up his ideas. On the other hand, Charles Sanders Peirce lived from 1839 to 1914, is the father of modern semiotics. He was a logician and chemist, and he constructed semiotics on the basis of his relational logics, which he had devised in the end of the 19th century, around 1900. The mathematician René Thom, who started with applications in biology, did not share these traditions and made a fresh and independent start into semiotics and human communication. And this is the main point. Normally you have a huge tradition and everybody tries to stand his tradition, repeat it and so on. And then someone comes who just doesn't have the knowledge of this tradition, and it just makes a new start, and this is probably the kind of instability or the momentum which made his specific innovation so important. In a talk in Geneva in 1970, Geneva was the place where Saussure lived and was teaching, and this conference were also in remembrance of Saussure. In this conference in Geneva, René Thom refers to Saussure and outlines the model of topological linguistics, as he called it. For René Thom, the morphologies in the human sphere are linked to the morphologies found in animals and the nature surrounding animals. The visual, acoustic, olfactory and tactile media of communication have their basis in the corporality and vital functions of living beings. And this is also valid for language. You must remember that language also, it's the thing which seems was the most important in communication, is a latecomer in communication related to animal communication, a very specific case. The formal concept of René Thom that René Thom puts in the foreground differ fundamentally from those advocated and used in linguistics structuralism. For instance, in his theory of cases, Louis Hjelmsle, which was the leader of the Copenhagen structuralism, postulated a kind of pre-logic kind of logic, but with certain simplifications or specifications as a basis of case structures. Case structures is a typology and case marking of nouns depending on a verb. So in a sentence, if you have a verb, then in certain languages you have on the verb case marking, which tells you what kind of nouns will be accepted or are necessary to form the kernel of a sentence. For example, in a transitive sentence, John loves Mary, then love, you have to have two nouns, which not and these nouns must fulfill certain conditions to give an acceptable sentence. So, on the other hand, this was a logic tradition of Jemsle. Noam Chomsky considered in the 1975 the algebra of free monoids or groups an adequate background. And this gave a huge the evolution of linguistic models. Since then, it dominated theoretical linguistics in the rest of the 20th century. Thom starts from a geometric point of view, more geometrical, generalized within the field of differential topology. For René Thom, the spatial and temporal aspects, which are also preconditions of a causal analysis, are primary. His idea of topological linguistics tries to integrate semiotics and other humanistic sciences into the general line of modern science initiated around 1600 by Kepler and Galilei, who had his picture today of Galilei here, brought to a first climax in the 17th century by Descartes, Leibniz and Newton. We heard about Leibniz just before, and responsible for the explosion of scientific knowledge in the next centuries. His proposals ask for a reorientation of questions and scientific strategies in linguistics and an adaptation to the standards established in the other sciences inspired by the development of natural sciences. It is therefore not surprising that linguistic and semiotic circles did neither understand or welcome nor accept his radical innovations. I come to the list of archetypal morphologies. I can go back to it, yeah. The elaborations in my book of 82, Catastrophic Theoretical Semantics, an application and elaboration of René Thom's theory, it was called, considered the somewhat different list of catastrophes, which considered also the duals of the cuspoids and neglected the restriction to codimension 4. His argument of Thom was that if you have space-time, then the codimension should not be larger than 4. But we will see that in linguistics you have not only schemata in space-time, you have also other spaces which are not restricted a priori to four dimensions. So I considered all the cuspoids, and this doesn't make a big difference finally. In the case of umbilics, now the second edition of René Thom's book was important because he, at a certain moment, he saw that there had been new results on the umbilics published by Godwin and later in the group of Siemen, and there were also more results coming up on the geometry of the umbilics, and it was clear that the the sentences with 4 nouns which he tried to derive from the umbilics could not be derived from them because they only have Talwegs not closed and you must then compactify these umbilics in order to get 4 attractors, and so a part of these lists then could not be could not be really. So here you have 3 and even 4 attractors could not be mathematically. There are other mathematical problems, for example, how to classify also passes, which are based on this schemata in the different catastrophes. I come to this the semantics of verbs. So I could only identify the envoyé. Where do you have this catastrophe? So more or less, these were not reconstructible, I found. So it reduces the number of for the interpretation in linguistics. I come to the semantics of verbs in Thom's hypothesis. The category of verbs that logicians traditionally neglected, for example, in Port-Royal grammar, that is 17th century Cartesian grammar, is reduced to the copula, and then all the other things are treated like adjectives, the verbs, the rest of the verb. And then but there's a huge set of verbs, of thousands of verbs in any language. Cannot just neglect this. And this becomes the theoretical core of a morphogenetic analysis. So you see the contrast to the logical tradition is very clear. Thom was motivated in his conjecture on basic sentences schemata by the work of Lucien Tenière, I already mentioned him, who had put the verb and not the subject in the Aristotelian tradition at the center of syntactic analysis, and who postulated a dynamic relationship between the verb and its dependent nominal syntactic complements called accents, the complements in French. Grammar, you speak of sujet, complément direct, et complément indirect. But the hypothesis must fit to all language, not only to French. We come back to that. The term valence, which Tenière introduced, referred to chemical structures, but he had, and his followers had, no means to complete this reference to chemistry. And here, remark, we had chemistry this morning. In fact, Charles Sanders Peirce, whom we saw just, he was a chemist, and he developed kind of logics for chemistry, and he generalized it to other systems, not only in chemistry, specifically also to semiotics. And he had already introduced this analogy of valence and chemical bonds. And I think that this kind of analogy, René Thom could give more substance to it. Also, it remains still controversial if the analogy between chemistry and linguistics sentences. I discussed it with René Thom one day, and yes, okay, the idea is that how to solve it, that we go back to specific, very general principles, and there are Euler formulas and of restrictions of certain structures, and then you can say that these kind of general restrictions apply in the domain of chemistry and in the domain of language, but you don't take it from chemistry. But it must you must not seek for a kind of causality where chemical structures are causal for the structures in language. This would certainly be not very persuading. The first question that the categorization of a process, an event, an action raises, and this is a major topic in the lexicon of human languages, categorize such things. What structurally stable structures underlie the processes in question, such that a lexicon of verbs can refer to them as a stable processes are underlying such a classification. Second, what are the motor controls and perceptual patterns that mentally appropriate such processes? And finally, how are perceptual and motor controls correlated with the appropriate linguistic forms? What part of this question, perception, you have, Jean has discussed just before. The motor programs modify the autonomous dynamics of the body's extremities and their contact with objects. It is, for example, the floor for the feet. These autonomous dynamic structures determine variables for perceiving movements and the cognition that regulates their systems. It can be concluded that the brain reflects the external dynamics by adding other parameters and distorting them in their metric. So this is not only the perception, but behind perception we have also motor programs. And this is mainly important for the analysis of semantics of verb. And these motor programs, they have a direct connection with physics, because you are under the physical laws when you move on the ground. Then you have between physics, motor programs, and perception rather direct links. The difficult thing is how to come from perception to language. The other things are also very difficult, but this is even larger, larger lacuna. Does this coordination with external physics also control the higher levels of cognition? That's a problem, especially linguistic cognition. We assume an intermediate level, as also did Jean, called imaginal or schematic. It applies processes that become increasingly independent from the psychophysical grounding and more complex, context-dependent, as a consequence they depend on chance. And this was one of the principles of Saussure, that l'arbitrarité, you think, that the linguistics seem to be arbitrary. But this arbitrariness is itself then something which can be explained as a process which changes the basic, or diversifies, varies the basic stable schemata. One should not think, as Saussure did, that language is just the result of arbitrary decisions or things like that. And there's no universality, there are no universal principles. That is a bit the consequence of structuralism, that you think these are arbitrary systems and you must find some emulation of these arbitrary systems, and it gives no sense to naturalize these systems. This was the position of most semanticians until perhaps 30 years ago. Now with cognitive linguistics and all this has changed in the last decennia. Okay. In what follows, we'll start from the psychophysical level to find schematizations, imaginal representations that underlie the semantics of verbs. Distinguish three typical levels of organization: locomotion, control of an object by an agent, and interaction between agents. In the case of movement of the body, extremities, legs and arms, one can use the physical description of the pendulum or double pendulum as a fundamental schema. And there is a group of psychologists around Scott Kelso in the United States. I skipped this. Excuse me. This is just a choice I made taking the in sense of Arnold, the simple catastrophes, and implying using also the whole list of Caspuets and also the duals, and then expanding also by compactification the umbilics to the exceptionals. This was the strategy to follow in order to reconstruct the proposals of René Thom. Now I come to So, specific movements are directed towards a target, an attractor. So you see with the double pendulum and pendulum that you have, in a certain sense, a physical model behind. This is what did the Kelso and this group, and also based on synergetics. There's a big movement also applying Thom's ideas, but evolving, enriching it with elements of statistical dynamics. This orientation implies a separation of the starting and the ending point. So in a certain sense, if you move, you are like falling, and then you stop the falling when you stop again. Yeah. This bimodality corresponds to a transition in space, and its lexical correlates are, in English, enter, exit, or come and leave. And it's easy to see that this has a correspondence with the two morphologies in Thom's list, finir et commencer. In the control, the second level of an object by an agent, the configurational aspect and the energetic aspect, which introduces the force of the agent and the effect of this force on the object can be distinguished. A basic type of effect is the creation, destruction, and regeneration of objects, elements of the environment. It is easy to see the correspondence of this type of action with the emission and the capture schemata in Thom's list, which I have cited as capturer et émettre. In the lexicon, the corresponding verbs are in most cases divalent, and you can generalize this type to other contents, which are divalent. Valency too, for example, transitive sentences. John loves Mary. We have two nouns to complete. The process performed by an agent can also influence or alter the quality of an object. In this case, the background is not space-time and motion, but equality space. So in the interpretation of this hypothesis of Thom, now you have, in order to cope with the phenomenon of language and of verbs, we have to introduce more interpretation level beyond spatiality or locality. For you have a space of qualia, of quality. All languages provide a lexicon of entities related to bipolar, sometimes also graded quality scales. In Western languages, the lexicon of adjectives and participles demonstrates a field. They are further linked to verbs describing such changes. Examples: long, short, strong, weak, good, bad, dirty, clean, right, twisted, and similar ones in many languages. Corresponding verbs of quality change are shorten, strengthen, clean, twist. In English you can just take the same form as clean and make a verb out of it. In most other languages in Germany, rein, clean, and reinigen, you must have a process of a word formation in order to achieve the twist to another grammatical category. Charles Osgood, a psychologist, an American, and his team have reconstructed statistically a three-dimensional space underlying hundreds of such quality scales in many languages. The theory is called semantic differential, Osgood, 1976. Topologically, the phenomenon of bimodality is a stable pattern in the organization of the quality space and akin to Thom's elementary catastrophe cusp and the archetype called change. We have also three modalities which can be derived from the butterfly, where you have three minima. And if you continue the cospuids, then you could also have unlimited number of intermediate qualities on the scale. An interaction scene, this is the third level, that connects several agents, presupposes a very complex perceptual and conceptual analysis of the individual observing the scene. However, it turns out that only a small group of these coordinated interactions achieve high stability, allowing schematization and semantic classification. From the angle of the spatial configuration, we can describe the gift. It is a scene during which two people exchange an object. And this is one in the list, give donné, one of the major examples in the list by René Thom. Christopher Seaman, Sir Christopher Seaman is now called, he lived from 1925 to 2016, who had cooperated a lot with René Thom. I met him when I was in Bure in '87. He proposed a model of attentional focus, which is changing between the different stages or phases of this process. And Jean Petitot has developed, and you have shown it here, his model of cut locus and diffusion contours in order to solve the same problem, to give then a kind of neuronal elaboration of this proposals by René Thom in the case of giving. And it's interesting that in sociology, the sociology of mouse, the giving and the ritual giving became a fundamental schema for social interaction, independent now from catastrophe theory. So this is really a central schema for social interaction. Yeah. I will specify a little more the transfer archetypes giving here. So in figure 6, this is kind of simplification of what is going on a linear path through the butterfly, yeah, a cut. So you have here the thick lines are the minima, the attractors, and the repellers, which would be between, are eliminated, and the bifurcations are emission and capture types in Thom's morphology. One can distinguish the source agent that initiates the process, the object that changes the processor, going through a change of control and dominance, and the target agent, the one who holds control of the object at the end. This step is the goal of the intentional action, and it establishes at the same time an asymmetry which may initiate the second agent to fulfill a reciprocal change. And here the model of ritual exchange can, in sociology, can be applied. I come to finish this first part. I come to an empirical evaluation of Thom's hypothesis, which is very difficult even after almost 50 years. First, the list of 16 morphologies was incomplete and not sufficiently specified for the morphologies derived from the umbilics. Second, in the lexicon of verbs, there are different layers of interpretation, also called local ontologies, from spatial motion, action, social interaction to qualitative changes, and even mental processes in imagination and memory retrieval. Third, the case patterns in classical Indo-European languages is, for instance, Latin and Sanskrit, but also in Russian and German, do not represent the corpus of languages worldwide. To summarize, the very complex situation, one must consider 3 restrictions. First, there are languages without case classification and marking. Word orders, stress patterns, or contextual cues may provide comparable information, for example, Chinese, but there are many of such languages. Second one distinguishes two basic types in those languages which explicitly mark cases, nominative, accusative, like in Western languages, for example, or also in Latin or in Greek, in German, in the Romance language, Roman language like French, but also in English, the case system has more already been destroyed. So in English you have only on the pronouns him, her, he, she, him, her, but and in the other Roman languages derived from Latin, you have the case system has disappeared, and you have prepositions which take a subset of prepositions which take care of the same function. Third, grammatical cases may be marked only for certain subcategories, for example, pronouns, and both types of marking can appear in different subfields. And an interesting question where I not deal here is how these systems change, how they arise, how they disappear, and how the historical development of such systems. This is called now in linguistic grammaticalizations. It is grammatical grammemes or grammatical morphemes are developed from full lexical morphemes which have an immediate visual or access, and this is in order to explain this topic you must go into the history of these systems, and this is then again a question of evolution, and you may then apply catastrophe theory in these cases, but this is not my topic. Now I come to the second part. How much time?
Say 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. Then we must go very quickly. So it's semiophysics. Yeah, it's his book in 88. I remember once I was speaking, I think, with the wife of René Thom, and she asked me why I don't try as a linguist to make sense of semiophysics of this new book, and what is my position to it. I said, oh, I had already so much trouble with the other hypothesis, so wait a moment, this is a very difficult field. Semiophysics is not an interdiscipline linking semiotics to physics, as for example biophysics linking biology and physics, or psycholinguistics linking psychology to linguistics. It rather builds a bridge between the traditionally separated fields of humanistic and social sciences and the fields of the natural sciences. The mathematics of dynamic systems theory may serve as a catalysator of new ideas linking both sides. Thus, semiophysics is rather a program of research and not yet an established discipline. In the following, I will consider shortly two applications of semiophysics beyond language: visual and musical communication, because semiotics, in my view, is then communication also, including language, but also beyond language. And from an evolutionary point of view, the other types of communication are more important, because if you don't understand these abilities of animals and perhaps even of plants and other biological systems, you cannot really understand what language is. I go first to visual art and second to music. Leonardo da Vinci, he lived from 1452 to 1519, was a new type of artist in Renaissance times, connected to contemporary science and philosophy. There was a barrier, because philosophy and human sciences, in order to treat them, you must have Latin knowledge. You must have been in Latin school. An artist normally had no Latin knowledge. So he could only get this knowledge by personal interaction with humanists. And this was the case in Renaissance times, that the artists got a totally new education and a different field of understanding. So here's Leonardo da Vinci illustrated Luca Pacioli, who was a mathematician, his treatise on the Divina Proportione, on divine proportions, composed in 1497, published in 1509, and devised the first skeletal representation of a Platonic solid. Also, all the solids were pictured by him. I give only one example. The following section discusses dynamic and topological features in Leonardo's mural Last Supper as an example of semiophysics in art. In Leonardo's mural Last Supper, the central figure Jesus represents a type of an equilateral triangle. In the 3 dimensions, if you would reconstruct it spatially, perhaps a tetrahedron, with some tolerance. The refractory is a box similar in shape to a cube, or on a rectangular base rather, part of it. And if one follows the lines of perspective, 1/2 of the octahedron, just if you think on Leonardo's interest in planetonic solids. The 4 groups of apostles also have a triangular shape, but they are agitated by a perturbation, which is origin in the saying, Jesus saying, "One of you will betray you." So you see. So Leonardo uses the mathematics of regular polygons and polyedra to organize a traditional topic, the Last Supper. As Slotowski in 1988 in a conference published in Logos de Catastrophe by Jean Petitot, there's a link between regular polygons and the cuspoids, and of regular polyedra with the unfoldings E6, E7, E8, which I have shortly shown. And the umbilics are the topological correspondent to the intermediate Kleinian dihedra. So there is a continuity in this sense between catastrophe theoretical models and this geometrical thinking in Renaissance and finally in antiquity and in the Pythagorean school, which Plato had as background. For Leonardo, natural dynamics is the source of bodily dynamics. And he discusses how the body must be shown. It must not be stiff, it must be in motion, and it must be in a balance motion. So you have torsions of the body, which are systematically studied, and such that it's not like a wooden figure, but it's something which is animated, and you should see it in the picture, that this is animated. And he says that, and it must also show the dynamics of the mind. Here you see the faces and the hands are such, as is organized, such as face and hands are very big in the picture, because they are all on one line. And then you can see where they are looking. So the pointing of gestures and of your eyes are an important message in this mural. Classical figurative paintings have a topic that follows from textual traditions, such as the Christian gospel or antique mythology in Renaissance times. However, even the purely visual message refers to different visual and painting traditions. So if you make a more intensive analysis, then you must look at where it comes from. The topic started of Last Supper not at the birth of Jesus, but around 1100. Why is another question. And then there have been thousands of pictures, and with all possible variations in space. And it's already here. This is very late after Leonardo that also this has continued. For example, here's a kind of reduction and re-transformation of parts of Leonardo's picture in Andy Warhol, Last Supper from 1987. Since the 19th century, new geometry models, non-Euclidean geometries, topology, and new dynamical systems, nonlinear and chaotic dynamics, have been formally described. Concerning this mathematics, Pollock, the next example, action painting corresponds to new geometrical and dynamic principles, as did Leonardo's painting relative to the mathematics of the 16th century. Jackson, I'll show you it works, yeah. Jackson Pollock, 1912 to 1956, leaves the static configuration of the first abstract paintings, for example, Kandinsky, 1913, and makes a radical move towards motion and action in paintings. In his dipping technique, color flows out of containers or is spread over the canvas. If you look at Pollock's painting, gray and red here shown, we can understand the thin threads as a trace of quick motion and the thick lines as knots, as halting points, assuming a continuous paint flow. Basic Gestalt laws are neglected, for example, in Gestalt psychology and applied to art, mainly in the work of Arnheim, who wrote a lot of books on this topic. The up-down structure of the left-right structure, or the diagonals connecting the corners, they are kind of pre-structure in the painting before anything is put on the painting, and they influence the geometrical structure of the painting. But this is left. This is negated in this new technique. Taylor, Nikolic, and Jonas, 1999, showed that Pollock's paintings have a fractal order. Specifically, two fractal measures are characteristic. The first is related to rapid hand motion on a scale of 2.5 to 5 centimeters, and the second scale 5 centimeters to 2.5 meters. It corresponds to his arm and body motions into and around the canvas. There's a large, and the other one is a small motion of his hand manipulating this paint container. And in his evolution, the measure, the fractal measure in 43 was 1 in his drawings, and it becomes 152, thus nearer to a line filling the given surface. The examples discussed, Leonardi and Pollock, cannot represent visual art as a whole, or art history as a process. However, the geometry and topological and dynamic view introduced by René Thom and other mathematicians is crucial for understanding art. For music, how much?
2 minutes. Maybe 3 if you want.
Yeah, this is so I will skip. You know that in music this has a strong physical and physiological basis in two ways, because the overtones you hear at your hearing organ, they have already different overtones which is a given structure, and which is also then which is there in physics, but which is also which is in the ear. And for example, for rhythm, you have marching and walking and dancing as a physical background of this part of structure. And it goes on, can show that this psychophysics of music is very fundamental and has been seen since antiquity, and many mathematicians, for example Euler and even now so-called muso mathematics, are building models for a torus of tierces, where the 12 tones of our music culture can be arranged on a path through the torus. But I will come to what is this is the salience of the perceptual side, or the motoric side of what is about the meaning of music. And there is a model called a kind of memory of forces, which can be a sign of music, which has been in 2000 proposed. Then you have a kind of average level of a music, so monotone, and then the melody is a kind of force which acts push it down or push it up. And I will only give a small example now to come to my conclusions. This is a Hallelujah by René Thom. You see there's a kind of a starting level on G and A. In French is sol, la way, and then going up to the E prime, Mi, one octave B, also higher at the end, and then going down in steps. And these movements also can then be linked to kind of psychophysical or emotive reactions as joy and or negative impressions. And there was mainly in the history of music, mainly in the time or in the 17th century, were big theories about canonization of specific meanings of music, which the composer had to consider in building good musical piece. So I come to my conclusions. So it's I have put it down too quickly. Yeah. No, I can do it just like that. So, on the first level, you have the conjectures of Thom are extremely, let's see, risky. You have seen. First, the mathematical basis was not yet really developed, because some years later already more details were known, and also, like as the mathematicians have pointed out, this technique of classifying passes which gives schemata is not mathematically really completely developed. It's easy for cusp and for the low cuspoids to see what kind of schemata you can define, but it's very difficult for the case of umbilics and all the question of interpretation. This is everywhere in science. You have a kind of model formula, then how to interpret it. You must see levels of interpretation. So it is a huge field, and this would have been a lot of further work for mathematicians, but also for linguists. And in semiophysics, I've shown that in the field mainly of other media, which are also very important for semiotics, it is very much clearer than in language that there's a strong physical or physiological basis and in the corporality of sign giving and of communication, which in the case of language, due to this kind of l'arbitraire du thing, it seems so arbitrary, is covered by these stochastic structures, and it's very difficult to find the basic principles which underlie it. And René Thom did a good job in uncovering some of these basic principles. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Mark on music? René?
There could be connection between language and visual art and music. You know that when you look at a picture, you make paths systematically. And so they could reintroduce such kind of specific accident that you provoke. And we know in music there is also kind of analog.
Yes, there's dynamics in pictures one often forgets by the eye can only see a small part of the picture and must really read the picture, but it's a bit erratic. But there are principles: what is attracted first by the eye, and what is second, and how it moves. So this is structured in. But still, with these pictures, what is difficult, and that is a good case with abstract paintings, and perhaps also, I could say, historically reason why abstract paintings came up in the this last century, is that normally you had all these textual or even literary contents which had to be transported by paintings in our culture, and this obscured the pure visual message. And then by the fact that you eliminate all this non-visual things, you can really come to the center of your, even if the public doesn't agree. But this was a very interesting, good move, but also influenced by science. So artists like Leonardo already are embedded in this intellectual culture, and then they are there's a feedback. Yeah. With music, it's true that it's more temporal and perceived, but still you must be able to conserve in your memory certain structures, and over time which are constant and which go together. And music is also, for this reason, very repetitive. So for example, the techniques of counterpoint, and these are techniques of repeating by variation the same thing in many shapes. But this is a large topic.
Yes, thank you, Alain. Wolfgang, very interesting presentation. During your talk, it evoked a long time memory of mine. I read somewhere a long time ago that, for example, in still lifes, the artist always put the crescendo of the picture on the right, because English or Latin-speaking people read from left to right. So if you put the still life on the left, is boring because the rest is empty table. Now, not every language reads from Hebrew, and Arabic reads from right to left, Japanese top to bottom. Is reflected in the painting somehow by these people, like Japanese or Arabic painters?
Yes, this is the things which Pollack has reduced, but this is a culturally dependent tradition, which how to look at a picture, and this depends also how to look at other types. For example, by reading. So if you are accustomed to reading left to right, or in the history of Western, in Greek history, you had also boustrophodon, left, right, left, like the farmer who plows his field, which feels the normal, real line without springing on the other side. So another dependence also on religion and other. For example, you have above is like the sky, not only the sky but heaven, and below that is earth, and what is under the earth, which is dangerous. Perhaps there's a devil down there. And what the child psychology showed that the shape of the frame, even if there's nothing in the frame, if you they made the experiment, if you put such a frame without anything and you put a point in it and you say repeat this point, and the people see the point and repeat it, and the point wanders from if you have okay, I have the chance here also to put something on there. And so you have some starting here, then it goes not to the corner, but in this kind of attracting, and depends naturally if you have if this is round or over this doesn't happen. So they are, and naturally you must also organize by cutting things, foreground, background, but also other means. You must organize this surface into pieces. And this is surely a kind of segmentation problem. And only if you have made this, then you can put into segments pictures you recognize. There is a kind of abstract geometry which is underlying the picture.
But in this language of like Latin or Greek, the order, okay, you go from left to right, but the order of the words, because there are flexions, can be very inflexible. And contrary in Chinese, for example, where you have no flexion, it's a fixed order. So this is not reflected, I suppose, in your remark.
Yeah, that's so language order. The thing is with language universals, after now many centuries or decennia of intensive research, many linguists say, okay, we don't see if there anything which is really, there are tendencies. There are strong tendencies. For example, if you have a word order with subject, object, verb, you have all the 6 different possibilities, but the frequencies, you have either the subject or the verb in front, more or less. But you have all the orders exist. You have a huge variation in human languages.
Yeah, it's very interesting, but we have to stop because